Hey, you're listening to Blindsight. Let's go. Mental health isn't something to take lightly. It's time to fight. It's time to thrive. Let's do this.
Hi there, this is Bill Lundgren, your host for Blindsight. Glad to have you with us. And today I have the pleasure as our frequent guest, our producer, Jonathan Price, because we have something we want to share with you all. We got a message from a listener who was asking about imposter syndrome. And I'm sure you've heard of it, even though it isn't officially in the DSM-5, as far as I know. It is a syndrome that a lot of people talk about because it sabotages people's presentation to other people. Their coaches for industry work on the imposter syndrome for employees, particularly, I understand, with women. And what it is basically is that you, if you have this syndrome, believe that you're a fraud, or you're afraid that other people will find out that you're a fraud and that everything you're doing is for nothing. And, you know, that can be very demoralizing and debilitating. So we want to talk today about what do we do? What do we do? Jonathan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. It's awesome to be back on here, and we'll play that question here for you guys in just a second. But yeah, this is a very interesting topic because not a lot of people, one, kind of really know what imposter syndrome is, much less have the ability to state maybe I have imposter syndrome. So it's kind of an interesting concept. So I'm excited to let people hear this.
Okay, great. Okay, here is the listener's question to us.
Hi there. My name is Evan, and I have a question for Blindsight, and more particularly, Bill Lundgren. So I'm a young man in my early 20s, and I often struggle with a thing known as imposter syndrome. And yeah, this is basically where you don't feel, well, yeah, you feel like an imposter in your, wherever you are, whether it be your workplace, your friend group. In this case, it's, I feel like that at work on occasion, and it has to do something with just the way everything panned out and how life never goes as planned ever. But in my case, things completely went totally opposite direction I expected them to go, in a good way. But at the same time, I still struggle with this imposter syndrome. You know, I often struggle with the debate of, wow, do I deserve this place? Do I deserve to be here and all that? I know. So I was wondering, are there any good coping mechanisms when you're, especially because with imposter syndrome, at least from my experiences, you either have really good days or really bad days. So on those really bad days when you're struggling with it, like, do you, Bill, have maybe some coping mechanisms that you could share with us with individuals that are experiencing it? I've heard from other people I've talked to that this is kind of a common issue, I guess, with individuals in my age group. Thank you so much.
Cool. So I think there's a lot to work with there.
Yeah, there is a lot to work with. And I'm glad that this has been brought up because it really, it allows us to talk about anxiety. And I want to start off with anxiety because there's a little bit of history that I think is helpful. One is the reason that human beings are on this earth is because of anxiety. That is, fight or flight. Because if we didn't have that fight or flight mechanism, we would have been eaten up by predators back in the caveman day. But because we have that and we're constantly alert, we've been able to survive to today. The problem is it gets in the way now because fight or flight is readily achieved anytime we're nervous. And that includes when we're doing a new thing or meeting new people, or as I say, when there's a capacity for the imposter syndrome to come up, when there's something new or something that we're doing that we're not quite sure about, and we feel very insecure, we're going to go into really going inward and talking very negatively to ourselves, rather than what we need to do is to listen to ourselves, acknowledge the anxiety, and say, okay, what am I anxious about? Now, another piece of that is that, when we get anxious, we go, that's an emotion. And we human beings have to operate in two terrains. One is the emotion terrain, and the other is the logic terrain. And so often, I'm sure you know, Jonathan, people who are 100% spend their time in the logic side, and they would know an emotion if they tripped over it. Like Dr. Spock, in Star Trek.
Yes, that's exactly who I was thinking about, actually.
And then people who are nothing but emotion. They would know logic if they tripped over it. And what we have to do is to operate in both spheres for our survival.
Yep.
And, if we're in a situation of high anxiety, we're focusing on the emotion and all the things that could possibly go wrong, all the things, mistakes that we can make. We expect that we're going to make them. And we have all this negative talk to ourselves that just increases the anxiety. So part of what the coping is to, one, recognize that you're anxious and say, hey, I'm anxious. I'm getting a little out of control here. Or a lot out of control. And what we have to stop right at that point, because what we're doing is we're giving that anxiety full control. And we don't have to. But we don't always know that there's a mechanism for stopping the anxiety. And the mechanism is when we can move from our emotion into a logic and say, ask ourselves, what am I nervous about? What's shaking me up? What's making me feel vulnerable? And we allow our logic to say, oh, well, I'm making this. Well, let's say, for example, I'm making this presentation and I'm not sure I know the subject. And I envision that everybody in the audience is an expert and I'm not. Now, does that sound like a pretty anxiety-producing situation, if that were true?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
One of the things we have to say to ourselves is like a nurturing parent. Eric Byrne did this a long time ago. He talked about the nurturing parent part of us, the adult part of us, and the child part. And if we look at the child part, that's what's all bent out of shape and causing our brain to freeze up. So what we have to do is the logic, the adult or the nurturing parent, one or the other, to help the child calm down. Say, you've got the information, you can present it. And sometimes when we're in a audience kind of thing, and I say this as a blind person, I can't get the feedback visually from my audience of how I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
that's hard.
One of the things I can do is, one, imagine the audience is stark naked. And that is so ludicrous. That is, and if the audience was naked, they're pretty vulnerable. So, I'm in command. And it sort of helped me to, we can laugh, as you did, and say, oh, okay, if I do that, then I'm going to calm down. Another coping mechanism, of course, is the deep breathing. Stop. One of the things that happens sometimes is when you're nervous, you're like a freight train heading for a wreck. And that's a sign to say, wait a minute, let me stop. Let me take a deep breath. Let me imagine, if we don't like the naked audience, how about an audience, everybody in clown suits? Something that would make them less intimidating to us. And
you're basically talking about pattern interruption.
Right. And also, it means that we are talking to ourselves in a nurturing manner and calming ourselves down, because the issue is not the audience. The issue is us and our perception. The cognitive behavioral people will say, what's your irrational thought? My irrational thought is that I'm going to ruin this presentation. And it means we get into a black-white situation where we say it'll be a disaster or it'll be okay, one or the other. And what we have to say is, okay, that's an irrational thought. What is the rational thought here? Well, I'm nervous. I need to calm down. But if I can calm down, then I will probably do a better job with this presentation or with meeting somebody new or whatever the situation that's making us feel very vulnerable. The other thing is to say, okay, I'm with this person and I'm afraid they'll find that I'm a fraud. Roll it out. Say, okay, if they find I'm a fraud, then what? What am I subject to lynching? Am I, are they going to beat me up? What? And if we think about it, say, no, that's not likely to happen. And that way we begin to calm ourselves down by using some of the rational thinking and to take a moment. And when you take a deep breath, it's not as long as you think to take a deep breath, to calm yourself down, and to people will think you're thinking when you're actually trying to calm yourself down. The thing is, you can take the time and stop the runaway train. And those two things particularly can help you to come back to the reality, or as I say, to be on both the emotional part and the logic setting, so that you're working with both.
So when I think of imposter syndrome and I try to wrap my brain around where that comes from.
Yeah.
You were mentioning is that negative self-talk. And a lot of that can come from things like being ill-prepared or feeling as though you don't have the requisite education or the skill sets or the smarts to be able to do the task at hand. And so when you have that lack of confidence, you do one of two things. You become isolated and secluded, or you become kind of arrogant and boastful, and both of which can be, on the extreme ends, can be damaging to whatever circumstance you're in. So if you're giving a speech, or if you're in an office environment and you're giving a presentation, or you're taking the lead on a project, whatever that be, and you're really trying to make sure that people don't see your lack of confidence. And so you're trying to show them something that you're really not. But if you have that confidence, there's a couple of tools that I personally use to be able to kind of overcome that. But Bill, you were getting ready to say something.
Yeah, well, when I was going to go back a little farther, and I'm not into blaming parents, but sometimes this setup for insecurity starts, in our growing up. The family,
very much.
The family is not prone to give us a lot of confidence, because they're constantly judging us, or they're saying you can do better or that kind of thing. So, we have to sort of recognize that we may be getting that message. But you're right in terms of the issue is how do we deal with the feeling of a lack of confidence in the midst of the situation? And, and that's when I talk about our irrational thinking. But you were going to go. I'd like you to finish what you were starting to say about what you see.
Yeah, so I have a couple of tools, and before I give you these tools, you were talking about the nurture versus nature in parenting. One thing that I started doing with my kids was I stopped telling them that I'm proud of them. And before everybody gets super upset at me and super like, you got to tell your kids you're proud of them. Yes, I do. But the first thing that they do whenever because my daughter has gotten really into baking and she's gotten really into sewing and crafting and that kind of stuff. And so whenever she says, Dad, do you like these? What do you think? I was like, well, tell me what your thoughts were. And she'll tell me what she thinks and what she thinks she could do better, or if she liked it. I was like, well, are you proud of what you did? And she'll say, yeah. I was like, yeah, me too, Ava. And I'm super excited for the next thing that you do. And that instills she was able to think first about what her feelings and her pride level was in that instance. And then if she comes back and says, well, I don't think I added enough flour, or I didn't add enough sugar, or it was too runny or too fluffy, or, whatever, I can say, yeah. And that's totally fine. You just created a way to learn something new. But I'm really proud of you for trying it and for experimenting, because now you've learned a way to not do something. And her confidence level skyrockets.
You bet. And you see this. The secret of what you're doing is you're leaving her to make the judgment first, rather than depending on you to make the judgment. And that's what we go around, keep thinking we've got to get them to approve of us. And I think what you're saying, and certainly my contention, is we have to approve of ourselves. And the other people's approval has got to be more the icing on the cake rather than the whole cake.
And truly, the main reason that I'm doing this is so that when she gets older, she doesn't have to be glued to social media trying to get the next trying to get the next big thing. And I want her to be, and my son to be, so confident in who they are, they don't have to worry about anybody's opinion, especially mine or even mine.
Right. And
so there's a couple of tools that I want to dive in, and I'm going to just do my biggest one first.
Okay.
If you are struggling with this self-confidence issue and you're dealing with this imposter syndrome, I guess we're going to call it, or just imposter mindset, I want you to take your hand, either one, out in front of you. And if you're looking at your thumb, or you have your thumb, this is the negative thought that you have. This is your personal self-negative thought.
Right.
And if you wiggle your thumb back and forth, you're connecting a physical action with your internal thought. Now, with the remaining fingers that you have, I want you to tap your finger to your thumb, and your fingers, your remaining 4 digits, are the actual truths. So if you're going into a presentation, Bill, and you say, boy, I don't think I really know the content. I'm really horrible at public speaking and I don't know what to do. You take that thought, which is your thumb, you touch it to your pointer finger, and your pointer finger is the truth. I did a lot of research.
Right.
Truth number 2, I've spoken a lot to a lot of people, and I have the ability to speak clearly and concisely with my audience. That's truth number 2. Truth number 3 is that I was hired and I was asked to come speak in front of a group of people because I know what the hell I'm talking about. Number 4, if you have a 4th one, or if you need a 5th one, is I know exactly what I'm talking about because I've been doing this for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Right? So now you have 4 absolute truths, and you just keep repeating those things, and you are creating physical stimuli to emotional stimuli. You are now balancing the logic and the emotional and the physical all at the same time. The key is you have to say these things out loud.
Yeah.
and to do these physical things to get your brain rewired to be able to circumnavigate that negative thought.
That's a good way to put it, because it gives us a physical thing. It's very similar to what I'm talking about in our way of thinking, and getting us to think in a more positive way prior to doing a presentation. And that's an excellent way, that using the fingers and going from the irrational thought to rational thoughts. And it's just, that's very concrete, and I think that's very useful. See, one of the problems in the syndrome is that we're talking to ourselves in a very negative way, and you're talking about a way to begin to talk positive and getting out of that negative thinking. And you see, the thing that people don't realize is that we can't change other people. We can't really be focused on other people thinking about us. What we can change is our focus on ourselves, which sounds narcissistic, but it isn't. It's supportive of saying some reality about ourselves that does not change if someone else feels negative about us, because not everybody's going to love us no matter what we do. And we can't change that.
Sure.
All we can change is our attitude and our view of ourselves to be confident and do what we need to do. Now, you said there was something else you also do?
Yeah. So the other one that you can do, and this is more if you have the time to be able to do this, is it's a written out version of the same thing. So you take your negative thought and you state it very clearly. I feel ...
Right.
I feel like I don't have the confidence to give a business presentation to my coworkers tomorrow. Okay, that is a very clear and concise thought. Now, the truth, you absolutely write truth. And then underneath that, you write your however many truths. I did this research. I did this thing. I did the presentation. I know this information backwards and forwards. They wouldn't have put me on the project if they didn't think I could do it. All these things that are truths. And you are journaling and writing out. There's something physical and emotionally releasing when it comes to journaling. The connection between your hand, the pen or pencil, and the paper can be very, very intimate. And it forces your brain to slow down. It forces you to really engage with the thoughts and the mental struggles that you're dealing with. And by writing all that stuff out, you can space out your words. If you want to take this even further, the gaps between words, space them out a little bit more.
Right.
And then put on really calming music when you're writing. Write with intention, write with direction, and make sure that what you're writing is absolute and not quote unquote your truth versus what other people's truths are, because the battle of your truth versus other truths is partially where that imposter, that psyche comes from. Your truth is that I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know this. I don't know that. That's not true. The reality of a situation is that you would not be put in a position if you didn't know what you were doing.
Right. Good material. Now,
sorry, I get really passionate about this because I know a lot of people who don't live up to their full potential because they've never been given the authority or the opportunity to live to that potential.
Now, there is one thing that the writer of that letter was saying, talking about in our relationship with people. We've been talking about presentation, but I think it's a very similar situation, particularly when we're meeting people for the first time or a group of people. We're constantly worrying about what they think of us. And part of what I think has to help people to say, well, what's going to happen if they think negative of me? Am I going to be cast into outer darkness? And what's going to happen? And that's in the moment. How do we, in the moment, remind ourselves that we're, of our good qualities and I think that people know that they're going to have this feeling when they're going to meet a new group of people, even the people they know. And again, you have to picture that in your mind, what you think is going to happen. And then emotionally, or as you suggested, write it down and emotionally picture yourself operating with a different scenario. Now, in other words, if you being accepted by the group, and it's a little bit different if you can't see them, but they let you know other ways that they like you, or you can also recognize that they're probably as nervous about meeting you as you are about meeting them. That we don't think about, well, how's the other person feeling? But you better believe that they're feeling the same thing, the same nervousness as you're feeling. And sometimes that helps.
Here's the fun thing about social psychology is when you approach anybody, regardless of who it is, with your own personal self-confidence, it really doesn't matter what the other person thinks of you.
Yes.
And you can live, because you have to go home with you at the end of the day.
That's right.
So are you proud of every interaction? Are you proud of every interaction that you were a part of today? I meet people new every single day doing this job. I meet new people every single time I go to the grocery store.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Am I confident in myself to have interactions that I am proud of? Not am I trying to impress the other person. And if I am trying to impress the other person, then there's something that I need to address.
That's why I was talking about you can't change other people. You can only have control over you and how you interact with people. That's really the key here. And in that,
and it's an embracement. It's an embracing of this humility aspect. If you can be humble in your shortcomings, you are going to absolutely crush this life. You're going to be so much more confident when you can address your humility and the things that you don't know how to. I surround myself with people who have way more knowledge and experience than I could about many, many things. But I know where I'm really good at, and I'm really confident at what I can do.
Right.
Now, when it comes to being the best financial wizard, I'm going to surround myself with bankers and those types of people who know numbers. I hate numbers, but so embracing those things can actually release you from that imposter syndrome.
And that's part of what coaching, what coaches do in the business setting. And that's what a counselor can do also. You can be your own counselor in a positive way. Then that's the way you're going to come across to others. But if you give yourself all these negative messages and don't question them, you're not going to be able to make the change that you need to make. And it takes just your own spending time with yourself and loving yourself in a way that you can put the best foot forward.
Well, Bill, I've had an amazing time talking about this, and I know we can talk about this for hours, and we've already talked about this for quite a bit.
Right.
But, do you have any final things that you want to leave listeners with that we can kind of really get them to sink their teeth into?
The thing I want to leave people with, and I know you do too, loving ourselves. It is not something terrible to do, but if you love yourself, then you have the capacity to love others. It's only when you love yourself that you can have that capacity, I believe. And you can give that love to other people.
Yeah.
So this is another Blind Sight with Jonathan, our producer, Bill, your host. Want to remind you, if you have any feedback, like what we had, you can email us. What do we call it? Feedback.
Feedback at Aftersight.
At aftersight.org. And there's also a feedback line, which is 720-712-8856. This is Blind Sight. See you next time.